Navigating float ownership in construction contracts. In this video, we'll talk about the most important parts of who owns float in construction contracts. Let's look at the key points to learn more about this subject. The first thing we'll talk about is how float ownership is becoming more important in construction contracts. Float is the open time available for different tasks within a project. The problem now is figuring out who has the right to use this float time. This has become a big worry because it directly affects the schedule and freedom of projects. Contractors may make assumptions if the language of the deal is not clear. They might think they are the only ones who can use the float for their activities. This assumption is based on the fact that the project schedule is only a rough estimate of how things will be made, and the float gives room for changes. But some owners don't agree with this and think the float should be theirs or given to the first person who uses it. In our second point, we talk about a very important problem. If an owner claims ownership of float, it could affect how a contractor does their job, how they do it, and even the order in which they do things. This could have a big effect on how the job is carried out. There is also the matter of the law to think about. If the owners take control of the float, they could be breaking the law without knowing it. Courts could see this as a violation of the contractor's right to run the job on his or her own. This could lead to long and expensive legal fights that are hard to understand. Lastly, let's talk about an interesting idea that Fondal brought up. He suggested looking into the legal effects of a certain task called estimated time allowance for non-excusable delays. This activity would be put on the critical path near the end of the project network. By looking at how this behavior affects the law, we can figure out how a court might look at who owns and uses float in a project. It's an interesting idea that could show how float control changes the way a project works. To sum up, who owns the float in a construction contract is a complicated matter that depends on many things. From how important clear contract wording is to the possible legal repercussions of claiming float ownership, it's important to know how to handle these complexities for a project to go smoothly.